hour. We'll also be talking to Fraser Myers, a columnist at Spiked Online, because it's a year this weekend since the gilets jaunes started their protests over in France. And every single weekend since then, that's 52 weekends leading up to this one, the 53rd, they have had violent protests every single weekend in Paris, in other parts of the country as well. We'll find out from Fraser if it's getting anywhere, where it's going, and where it's likely to end up. We also want to take more of your calls, of course. 0344 499 1000 is the number. You're listening to me, Mike Graham, right here on the fastest growing radio station in the world. It's Talk Radio.
The Independent Republic of Mike Graham on Talk Radio.
Now, there's a fascinating piece which I retweeted, I think, last night. I may do it again right now, because Fraser Myers, columnist at Spiked Online, has written a very interesting read, a sort of a long expose, if not just an address, really, about the whole Gilets Jaunes movement and how it started, why it's still going, what it's become, and where it's likely to end. Fraser, very good morning to you. Welcome to the show.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, not at all. I read the piece last night. I thought it was really interesting in terms of how you laid out the kind of the founding facts of why the movement started. But what fascinated me, perhaps more than anything, was that it's kind of morphed into different things over time, and yet it still seems as powerful as it ever was, and it still seems almost as undefinable as it ever was.
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things that has happened is that people are genuinely kind of experimenting with different forms of protest, different forms of organisation. So, you know, we've all seen the images of people in their yellow vests on the street, occupying roundabouts, stopping traffic or marching on the Champs-Élysées. But there are also people, organising meetings, trying to set up political parties, trying to push for forms of direct democracy in France. So it really is an experiment. And some of those things are going to fail, and some of it is quite messy because it's still a leader kind of process. But I think it's all very exciting to watch what's unfolding there.
Well, it really is. Particularly with the kind of through the prism of the European Union and Brexit and everything else, because, we were constantly told that, it's very civilised to be part of the European Union. It's a marvellous place to be. And yet, we've got the problems in Spain with the Catalans, having sort of running street battles with the police in Barcelona. We've got the Gilets jaunes in France. We've got all sorts of other problems in other countries. And it almost shines an interesting light onto what's really going on inside of those countries, because Macron doesn't appear to really know what to do.
Yeah, that's right. And I think in the long term, the European Union has played a key role in fomenting people's anger.
Yeah.
So I point this out in the piece. In 2005, the French had a referendum on the European Constitution. It wasn't an in-out referendum like we had a few years ago, but people voted against the Constitution. The majority of the country voted against the Constitution, but a few years later, it just gets repackaged as the Lisbon Treaty. So people are very well aware that being in the European Union denies them a kind of form of democracy. They know that their decisions are not respected as part of this bloc. And, there are obviously clear parallels with that and the Brexit process. We've voted to leave, and successive governments have either tried to overturn that result or repackage the leave vote as a kind of deal that doesn't really take us out of the EU. So I think people in this country can probably relate to that very frustration.
Yes, and it's very much aimed at, as you've said in your piece, the elites of France, because the French are a very elitist nation, aren't they?
I would say even more so than the British. If you think that we have a class problem in the UK, really, look at France. And not only that, the politics of France is very incredibly top-down. The president practically has impunity to act like a monarch. The parliament is basically toothless. So there is a real lack of, not only is there a lack of representative democracy, but also, as I said with this referendum, direct democracy gets ignored as well. And so that's why you often see people spilling out onto the streets. It's not just because it's not just something in the French character that makes them angry, but it's because they genuinely don't have a very representative system. But even so, when you see people striking on the streets and things like that a lot in France, the Gilets jaunes is on a different level. This is the biggest revolt against the establishment since 1968 in France.
Yeah, and how are the establishment dealing with it? Because Macron's made a few concessions, hasn't he? Originally, the whole thing started because of a hike in a fuel tax, which was kind of picked up upon by several people, working class people mainly, in rural France, who feel as if they really have no place in modern Paris and modern France, do they? And yet it's still going on, and it's no longer really just about the fuel tax.
Yeah, I think quite quickly it stopped being about the fuel tax, because the concession to actually stop that hike happened pretty early on. There were some really important concessions last year around December. Concessions that meant that people were getting a rise in the minimum wage. There were certain tax breaks. There was also lots of people were getting extra bonuses from their companies and things like that. And those were really important, and, you know, putting change in people's pockets is always an important thing. But at the same time, the other response from the establishment has been to demonize the gilets jaunes, to say that they are racist, anti-Semitic, far-right, all these kind of usual, you know, insults that we now see continuously thrown at working class people across the Western world when they revolt against the establishment.
Right.
And there has also been a really significant police crackdown. We've seen a lot of images of Hong Kong and maybe some in Barcelona, but I think the one thing that hasn't really been shone a light on in the Western press is the police crackdown in France. You know, 870 people have been given serious injuries by police. Around 20 people have lost an eye just from going out on the streets and protesting. And when you see some of the videos of the people being beaten up and you know, by the police, it's really shocking. I've seen videos of elderly people in wheelchairs being beaten up. It's really, really frightening.
Yeah, and in your piece you talk about people who've had their hands severed as well. I mean, just horrendous stuff going on. And that's one of the things that also puzzles an awful lot of people. I mean, practically every weekend on social media, I'm seeing these videos, and I'm being asked by people, why are the mainstream media not covering this? Is it because this kind of narrative of right-wing fanatics has fed through into the media here, and they think, well, maybe we shouldn't cover this because these are all crazy people?
Well, it's interesting, because people often ask me, is it illegal to cover this? People genuinely think that the British government has censored coverage of these protests, but that's not the case. I think the media, on the one hand, you know, a lot of the media are part of the establishment. I think that the protests just don't interest them that much. They don't necessarily relate to these people, you know, and their struggles, and they don't find them that interesting. I think in part there are many who are turned off by the protests who buy the line that they're all mad racists and right-wingers.
Yeah,
and stuff like that.
I mean, I know that from just working in newsrooms, you know, if something keeps happening, it becomes less newsworthy. So there is an element, I suppose, of that in as much as, you know, there's another riot in France, there's another riot in Paris, the same one as there was last week and the week before that. So it becomes less newsy. But nevertheless, it doesn't stop them covering the similar kind of activity in Hong Kong or Barcelona.
Well, what I'm always struck by is the mismatch between the demand online for people to, you know, hear about the gilets jaunes. You know, the pieces I write about them always are really well read.
Yeah.
And the lack of mainstream coverage. People really want to find out about it, and that demand is not being met for some reason.
Yeah, no, it's strange. And so, I mean, will we be talking this time next year about the year 2 scenario? Because, I mean, there doesn't appear to be any end to it at the moment. What do you think is going to happen?
I think that, you know, there's obviously been a resurgence of the anniversary. The protests have been thinning out. That's partly because of the police treatment. It's partly because people are, you know, once they had those concessions back in December, the government hasn't really been moving to give them much more. So I don't know, but I'll be honest with you. When I first went out to France to cover these protests, week 5, and I thought, have I wasted my money on a ticket to go out there because this could all be over? I thought it might have been over even sooner, so who knows?
Yeah, right.
Maybe
well, one thing that hasn't worked for them is sort of political representation, because they've attempted a couple of times, haven't they, to stand in elections, and they just don't seem to be getting anywhere with that.
Yeah, I think it's interesting when the problem is they really don't like to have leaders. And so as soon as someone almost nominates themselves as a leader, then they kind of get shot down by other people. You know, they're assumed to be, you know, doing it for personal gain or something like that. I think that is the kind of business of the movement. At the end of the day, you know, we do need, people do need to have political representation. I think it's a good thing to have more direct democracy, but we can't be following politics all day, every day. We do need people to represent us on a lot of occasions. And yeah, in theory, people are in favour of the Gilets Jaunes party. So there was a kind of poll around the time of the European elections that said that a Gilets Jaunes party might come third. But then in practice, when people started setting it up, no, it put people off instantly.
Yeah, interesting stuff. Fraser, great to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed. Fraser Myers, our columnist at Spiked Online.